Greetings. Welcome to another episode of Fighting the Void. We have been gone for a couple of weeks. I'm sorry about that, but you know, family stuff, little trips. It's summer. I've got kids. These things happen. Also, you will notice that this is not live as per the usual. That is because the overlords at Google have killed Hangouts on Air. To my knowledge, there's not yet a replacement for that. I'm still looking for something that's going to work with a system that I already have to be able to, bring in guests and still do live streaming. So right now we're pre-recording. So, and if you got, but we're going to be uploading it to YouTube, so you can still comment, comment below and all of that jazz. So today we're not doing politics. We're not doing religion, although that depends on how broadly one defines these terms. We are talking about comic book movies, which can get one just as passionate, especially when you've got three nerds in the room. And what we have today is a little debate about something you might have heard of called the Snyder Cut. We've had our guest Eric here on a couple of times talking about the release of Snyder Cut campaign. So if you've seen the previous episodes with Eric, you're already well familiar with Eric and his stance on the Snyder Cut and his involvement in trying to actually make it a reality. We also have today sort of the screw you, the Snyder Cut sucks portion of the debate. And feel free to correct me on that at any time, Jacob. We've got Admiral Jacob Airy here, writer for the Daily Wire, avid comic book fan, also has his own YouTube channel at Studio Jake, if I've got that all right.
All correct.
And again, we are all avid comic book fans. We all have slightly different opinions. So I'm going to do my best to moderate this debate between these two guys. To be fair, full disclosure, I am not necessarily an unbiased moderator. I actually lean in Eric's direction. I want to see this thing, and I think at the very least it'll be better than the Whedon version that we got. So, all of that said, gentlemen, Snyder Cut. Now, Jacob, I'm going to give you the first volley here, and what is your understanding of do you actually think the Snyder Cut exists? And also, would you actually want to see it just for curiosity's sake?
I do think it exists, but I don't think it's complete. I think maybe they may have to use some of the stuff from Whedon's cut to at least conclude it or to fill in some of the gaps. But I do think it exists.
Okay.
And I do want to see it out of curiosity. So a lot of people think I'm anti-release the Snyder Cut. That's not me. I'm for get a bootleg copy from the man down the corner. That's kind of my corner of it. I don't think it's possible it's better than Whedon's version, but let's not forget Whedon had to work with Snyder's stuff. So yes. And in fact, if you watch the movie, you can tell when Whedon takes over and when Snyder takes over. It's very the different tones in the movie is what made it not so interesting. But that's my take on it. I would see it out of curiosity, if nothing else, because I'm an avid Batman fan. I've been reading Batman comics since I was 8 years old. I did watch Batman and Robin and Batman Forever and even Batman versus Superman. So my take is I'm fine with it being released. My whole thing is it doesn't really matter because if it's released, I'll go check it out for curiosity's sake. But I honestly my expectations for it aren't that high. I think it's going to disappoint a lot of people the same way The Last Jedi did, disappointed Star Wars fans, or if you're an MCU fan like I am, like Thor Dark World disappointed a lot of people. I think it's going to be that level disappointment for it.
Okay, Eric. So, Snyder Cut equivalent to Last Jedi. That sounds like fighting words to me. All right. Now I'm going to say you probably have a different take. Now, I don't think your take is too different as far as the completeness goes, because we've discussed before. I think you estimated it would probably take, you would take at the very least a few $1 million to, sand off the edges and get this thing actually to something that you would actually want to see in the theaters.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, I agree. Now, as far as whether it's complete or not, it really depends on what your definition of the word complete is. Excuse me. I mean,
Sir, you're going to have to die on your own time.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got a little too much coffee, I guess. Okay. If by complete do you mean special effect, visual effects, or score and all that, then yeah, I'm willing to work with you on that. But as far as filming, look, Zack Snyder himself said in his convention where he did his director's cuts and so on, he actually said, and this is on video, for sure, it's done. I have a cut. I have a bunch of them, so it's not like I can't release it or not. It's up to them. Now, we know, and this is not me speculating, this is established fact confirmed by Zack himself, by Jay Oliva, who is the director of the animated Dark Knight Returns and Flashpoint Paradox, who also worked with Zack on the movie, of Larry Fong, Zack's cinematographer. They all said the same thing. Zack shot everything he needed to shoot, and he assembled everything. He achieved picture lock, which means it's done. All that is left, all that would arguably be left, is finishing up the visual effects. Now, Zack himself has pointed out spots where his visual effects are not complete. So there's that. And we've heard that even though Junkie XL composed the score, they didn't edit it in at the time. So as far as complete, Zack would not need to edit in anything from Whedon. He's got everything he needed to shoot. And those who've worked with him have said, like Larry Fong said this, Jay Oliva, if I recall correctly, Jay Oliva said this too. Zack Snyder shoots his pickups in a very interesting way, where he shoots them, right after shooting a film, a scene, he goes straight to the editing room that night, and then looks at it, puts it together, and if he needs to do pickups, he does it right away. And he does that partly to be economical, but mainly so that he can get his cut, the film he wants, together as quickly as possible. He films the scenes that need the most visual effects first, and then he sends them, and then after looking at them and editing the way he wants, he sends them right to the VFX artist right away. Mm-hmm. So as far as footage and editing, it is 100% done. But as far as what's left, what might be left is visual effects and score, at that sort of thing.
And I think that's a very reasonable assumption that at the very least that there's some post-production work that has to be done on this in order to, if you want to get it into theaters. Now, there are, of course, have you guys both seen the like the director's cut of Chronicles of Riddick? Because that kind of presents where you can go with this.
Not necessarily, but I know what you're going with it, though.
Okay, yeah.
The Donner cut, for example.
For those who don't know, with Chronicles of Riddick, it was the theatrical version was not necessarily certainly not what Vin Diesel wanted to see released. There were various points that needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, and there was a director's cut released where there were a lot of shots and everything that weren't completely finished, and you could sort of decide to watch those or not. And I could see it seems kind of a no-brainer to release a version of Justice League like that.
Yeah.
But that aside, now I probably should have done this as the first question to set up a little bit of context. Jacob, what's your general opinion of one, Snyder as a director, and two, the status of the DCEU?
Okay, so I know that I've made a lot of people angry with this statement. Zack Snyder is a hack. He is a terrible director who 300 is fine, and I guess if you want to count the Owl movie, okay, fine, whatever. But every movie after 300 has been a practice in how not to make a film. What he does is it's like getting a beautiful Christmas present from your aunt, right? And it's beautifully wrapped, and you open it, and even the box is nice, and you open that, and it's socks that she bought from Walmart. And that's what Snyder does. His movies are visually stunning. He obviously is really good at picking at picking composers, but his movies are filled with contradictions. He puts in this imagery that's supposed to invoke some sort of intellectualism, but it just looks corny. And he has no sense of plot other than, oh, I'm just going to put a bunch of random incidents together and then hope that it makes a cohesive storyline. He contradicts and on top of being bad at character development, he contradicts his character development that he establishes early in the film. And this is true of Sucker Punch. This is true. Man of Steel was kind of saved by Henry Cavill's acting and Amy Adams' acting. They're both really good actors, so they kind of rescued that movie. Certainly not Kevin Costner or Diane Lane, but Henry Cavill was good as Superman, I guess, and Amy Adams was good as Lois Lane. So that movie was kind of made it passable, in kind of a Michael Bay sense. But then Batman versus Superman. That movie is just hot garbage. Again, I don't even want to compare it to The Last Jedi, because at least The Last Jedi had a coherent plot. Batman versus Superman, there's no character motivations for any of the characters. So I won't go any further than that. You can read my review on my blog. But my point is, Snyder is a hack. He's one of 3 that are active in Hollywood who keep getting these big budget deals, and just to wrap his movies in pretty visuals. As far as the state of the DCEU, they need to just kill it, and they need to go back to the way it was in the 90s and the early 2000s, where the characters kind of had like standalone universes. So like the Green Lantern and Superman Returns came out at the same time as the Dark Knight trilogy, but they weren't necessarily connected. Right. My understanding was they actually deleted a scene where Christian Bale had a cameo in Superman Returns, or I can't remember if they cut it out of the script or if they actually shot it. But he was supposed to have a cameo in Superman Returns. Green Lantern apparently was supposed to somehow connect to Superman Returns, but that was going to set up the DCU originally. But they really need to just go back to that, where they focus more on standalone stories. Keep doing the Aquaman, keep doing the Shazam, keep doing Wonder Woman. Heck, go forward with Batman with Robert Pattinson. But it needs to just go back to where they focus on single issues. Really, they launched it completely wrong with Man of Steel. They should have launched it with Justice League and then spun everybody off. They should have done the opposite of Marvel. I think that would have set them apart as a cinematic universe. But that's my take. I think, especially if they go forward with Birds of Prey, and if this Joker is as controversial as people are saying it is, I honestly think people will like Joker. But I don't think, and I know that Joker is not a part of DCEU, but it'll give kind of a bad taste in the mouth of fans and just audiences in general, I think. Because if you read some of the stuff that's coming out of Birds of Prey, it sounds terrible. And I don't even think James Gunn's Suicide Squad is going to save them at that point.
Okay. That was a lot. There's a lot there. I'll be honest. I haven't followed the development of Birds of Prey or Suicide or really any of it, because again, this is one of those things I kind of stopped doing a few years ago, and I was like, it's kind of killing my enjoyment of movies a little bit. So unless somebody's paying me to do something with this, I'm not gonna look at much more than what's going on with the trailer. And then if I'm curious after the fact, I'll go back and look at this stuff. So, Eric, I'm willing to bet you have a slightly different opinion.
Jacob, let me ask you this.
Okay.
You called Zach a hack several times, and I've heard this accusation levied against him a lot.
That is true.
How do you define hack? What is that even?
It's someone who pushes out art or maybe our film, if we're talking about films. It's someone who pushes out films and they present it as sort of this faux, this is the next big thing, this is my artwork. It's kind of like the people who copy Rembrandt and then they say, oh, look at my stuff, look how great it is. And you're like, oh, that's just Rembrandt. And that's kind of what Snyder does. He imitates a lot of people. And then he's mad when people say, you're not really that original, dude, and your stuff kind of sucks. So I would say that is what I would define as a hack, someone who does a lot of copying and whatnot, and then expects you to go, hey, you're so original.
Okay, this is the first time I've heard that being applied to Zack Snyder, that he just copies other people's styles. Now, I myself would define hack as someone who isn't necessarily trying to reach for a creative vision, who basically just goes for the lowest common denominator. Like, a case could be made that when he's doing the Transformers movies, Michael Bay is being a hack because he's not really reaching for any kind of greatness, if you will, of any kind of quality. He's just really just going through motions to provide just plain entertainment. Now,
well, to the Michael Bay point, though, he's not trying to be something that he's not. He just goes, "This is my purview." And
I would agree. I would agree with that. Michael Bay knows what Michael Bay is.
Yeah, Michael Bay knows what Michael Bay is. But the thing is, like, I don't think he's a hack at period. Like, when he's not doing Transformers, his stuff is actually like, you can feel like there's an actual passion behind it.
Yeah, sure. 13 hours.
For me,
great example.
For me, like, so for me, then absolutely. For me, like, a hack would therefore be defined as someone who completely sold out, if you will, who isn't really doing anything for this for the sense of any creative vision, and is simply just going through motions just to get bucks.
I would call that a sellout. I wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in the of actually progressing with the debate, though, okay, Eric, how would you rebut the idea that Zack Snyder copies, others, and in fact, it's or just the general lack of originality accusation?
Well, I'm just curious. Because all I can really say is it's as if he and I have watched two completely different sets of movies. I mean, and I'll say this: it is not unusual to draw material from other sources. I mean, Christopher Nolan, who on Twitter you yourself said Christopher Nolan was like the one inarguable visionary in Hollywood today.
Right now, this second. I'm not saying of all time. I never said of all time.
Yeah, of course not. Not of all time.
Today.
Today.
A statement I agree with, incidentally.
And yet, a case could be made if you're going to say that Snyder's not being original. He's just taking from other things. Well, the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman Begins, he's taking from Batman Year One and the animated series. I'm not talking about
adaptation. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. What I'm saying is Snyder, he takes like these skills from other directors, so like how he does cinematography or how he does visual arts, and he says, "This is my vision." And you're like, "No, we've seen this stuff before." And that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying because he adapted Man of Steel from Superman Earth 1, I'm not saying that's what makes him a copycat. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying he presents himself as this professional. I know about filmmaking. Shut your face. I'm above criticism. And he's really not. He's kind of his stuff is not as original. No. I'm saying he presents himself that way, and he has on several occasions. And his profanity-laced rant against a fan who just asked him a question is proof of this.
He wasn't attacking a fan. He wasn't attacking that fan who asked him the question. Let me correct you right then and there. He was not attacking that fan.
I watched the video.
I watched it too. He was not attacking that fan. The fan asked that question, and he used it as a jumping-off point to go against the people who have called him, among other things, hacks. Now, and frankly, I sympathize with him on that, but he was not attacking that questioner. I'll tell you right there.
All right.
But as far as
regardless of any of his social media interactions,
regardless of him just like taking other people's equipment, like are you saying, for example, the cinematography, like is that like you say he steals the cinematography style from someone else? Because
I'm not accusing him of theft. What I'm accusing him of is him presenting himself as this original guy who's only making original things in original techniques, and that's not true.
Well, here's the thing. How he by that argument, nothing is...
And his films are crap.
Well, by that argument, nothing is original. In fact, if you're going to use that argument against Zach, you might as well use that argument against William Shakespeare. Because what did he do? He took stuff from Marvel.
Sure. I actually, William Shakespeare, I'm not a huge Shakespearean fan.
I don't think
he's a hack, but
by your argument, he kind of is. Except the only difference.
Call him a hack. I don't think he is.
I said by your argument, by your criteria, he's a hack. By what you've laid out, except for the fact that I like so and so, I like this person, but I don't like that. It's almost as if Hack is just someone I don't like, a filmmaker I don't like. That's
Well,
what
sure.
it sounds like.
That's what everyone does. If you,
Well,
Because
I
I
won't
would
say
prefer.
that I'm not. I'm
Because
not. I think
gentlemen, let's rein this back in from our personal opinion of Zack
Yeah.
Snyder,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
My only issue,
how he presents himself.
It's just my only issue is just I would prefer to use these
Mm-hmm.
terms in a more objective sense. Like there's specific criteria for which you could objectively say that someone fits this criteria as fitting this definition.
If I see one thing with Snyder and people's opinions of his films in general, it is highly one way or the other. You either really, as a general, almost no one is meh about Zack Snyder. People either really like Zack Snyder or people really don't like Zack Snyder as a rule. I'm actually a little bit, I'm actually more in the like category than not. I really enjoyed Man of Steel.
Yeah.
I only, believe it or not, I have not seen 300. I know, right?
this is one good film.
It is.
I
will say this.
It is the one film that he's done that
universal.
everyone agrees is good. Sucker Punch kind of seems to be the one that everyone agrees wasn't good.
and you know who else agrees? Who else kind of agrees on Sucker Punch? Zach. Because
Really?
Zach himself said that there is no, like someone asked him, well, there's an extended cut of Sucker Punch. Why didn't you bring that to your director's cut event? And he says, because the director's cut isn't out. That's not my director's cut.
Huh,
they were asking me to do reshoots. And now, as far as all these the subjective opinions of Batman v Superman and Man of Steel and all that, where it's just I don't like it, or it's just he contradicts himself and so on. Well, let me ask you this, Jake. Okay. Have you seen the Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition, the 3-hour cut?
Yes, and that only solidified my opinion.
All right, so
I remember
seeing
you tweet about that.
I will say that it was better than the theatrical cut because it filled in plot holes that he didn't need to cut out. This is another one of my points. He wastes time with Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about Superman. It was a completely pointless scene in the movie when he could have been pointing out. Oh yeah, it was completely pointless when he could have been having explaining why Superman just flew off. And the theatrical cut, when the bomb goes off in the House of Representatives, he just flies off like a jerk. And at least in the extended cut, we have some context on why he flew off. But it's still kind of like, okay, so you're going to leave in Neil deGrasse Tyson talking philosophy instead of explaining why Superman abandoned his duty to rescue all these people? Like, that makes more, that would have made more sense to me. He just didn't choose scenes well.
Well, first of all, yes, he was told to cut it down for more screenings. That was one thing. Now, as far as the Neil deGrasse Tyson thing, now you don't see the importance of that scene, like the whole debate over Superman.
It makes no difference to the plot whatsoever.
It's not what it does. You do know what I mean. Again, what it does is it grounds. It is very much. Zach is doing for Superman what, in many ways, what Christopher Nolan was doing to Batman. If this kind of person existed in the real world, how would the real world take him? There's
this thing called fiction.
There would be,
and
there would be a debate.
I don't need to. Yeah, sure, there would be a debate. But the thing with Batman in The Dark Knight, which what Nolan does well, is he makes it incredibly subtle. It's important to the plot. It drives the plot. I don't care what Neil deGrasse Tyson thinks about Superman. At least do it in the context of the Daily Planet. Have the Daily Planet people debating. That's fine. But Neil deGrasse, this whole thing where he's trying to shove this realism at us, to me it adds to the pointlessness of the plot. It's a science fiction film. I don't care what Neil deGrasse Tyson has to say about Superman or MSNBC or whoever.
So if it were a fictional character,
hold on. Let me ask a clarifying question here. Eric, what would you say not Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman was ultimately about?
What it was about was it was about bringing these characters. It was about showing them at their most vulnerable, showing them, forging them through fire, showing them at their most human, if you will, bringing them through these things And I actually like one thing that I love. Let me tell you this. I was always more of a Batman fan than a Superman fan. I mean, I liked the Christopher Reeve stuff, but I felt the best part of the Christopher Reeve films was the first half of the first movie where he's going through these and he isn't sure who he is and he goes on this journey. Then he finds the hologram of Jor-El in the Fortress of Solitude, right. And then he goes through and he finds out who he is. And just that it's a beautiful stuff. But for me, when I saw Man of Steel for the first time, I felt a connection to Superman. I felt like I could identify with him, realizing this guy is an outsider, and he doesn't want to be. He wants to look for his place in the. He's trying to look for his place in the world, and his foster parents help him find it. Like Jor-El helps him find it, and his relationship, his love for Lois Lane, helps him find that place in the world. And that was Man of Steel. Batman v Superman is him struggling with this Boy Scout is struggling with this shades of gray, grounded real world that doesn't see things in that way. And honestly, a Boy Scout, a black and white view of the world Boy Scout, an idealist like him, thrown into this global context with these politics and these complicated things, he would struggle emotionally with, is this even worth it to me? And to me, the fact that he goes through that and then he finds his purpose and comes out of that more sure of himself and willing to sacrifice himself for this world that isn't sure of him, I found that very inspiring myself. Very much.
Now, Jacob, what would you say Batman versus Superman was ultimately about? Because I think the real divide here is entirely what you think it's about.
I actually don't disagree with Eric's take on what the movie's about these two conflicting worldviews. So Batman, he deals with realism. Superman, he kind of sees things from up above. I actually don't disagree with that take. My problem with it is the film represented it very poorly. And going back to, we're showing online discussions with these people no one cares about, debating Superman and what it meant, the poor motivations of the characters, and so on and so forth. But no, I agree with that. It's two opposing worldviews clashing, and Zack Snyder, he's real big on the man versus God thing. Mm-hmm. That's present in 300 and the Owls of Ga'Hoole, and so on. So that is kind of this idea, this all-powerful kind of Mary Sue. Although I won't say Superman's a Mary Sue in Batman versus Superman, but I will say this kind of this all-powerful, almost godlike being meeting this kind of regular person who can put him on his knees. So I do agree with that. It's kind of the clash of those worldviews.
So you see it as more of an execution issue. I actually think one of the main things that it was really about was how does what it was really about was the fact, okay, how does the real world deal with these people? How does it deal with Superman? And how does and even a little bit, how does the real world deal with Batman? Because there was a lot of that going on as well, with Clark Kent questioning the Batman's methods and his effect on society. I think that is really what it's about. What does the real world do with extraordinary people? And by the real world, I mean society today.
And if I may, that is precisely the value of having these real world figures, like whether it's Neil deGrasse Tyson or Charlie Rose or Andrew Sullivan, or even Jon Stewart, for better or worse. Like, bring these real people in. That is precisely the value of that. It is grounding in the audience's head. What if Superman lived among us in our world? How would our world take it? And what this does is it holds up a mirror to us and forces us to ask that question. I mean, yes, we love these characters in the comics, but if this person really existed, would we really accept him that easily? And that's something that, yes, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I love it. I'm always entertained by it, and I enjoy it, especially Captain America Winter Soldier, which is the masterpiece of the MCU. But it's something that it is very hard for me to get the idea of this sort of thing could actually happen the way it did here. And as a result, it is harder for me to identify with the scenario, to me.
Well, again, though, the Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't pretend to be the real world. It pretends to be a fictional world, and it does mirror aspects like Captain America: Civil War. I know I have the opinion that Civil War is actually a really good film because it and I know this. I'm friends with Warrior Woman 91. She and I just debated this on her podcast. And but I actually think that Captain America presents those real world consequences of superheroes living among us.
I want to go and watch that because I want to go and watch that debate on Kelly's channel because I think that'd be good.
I link it on my blog. Go check it out.
Great. It's funny, because I actually wrote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just saying, Snyder, like you can throw big names like Charlie Rose and Neil deGrasse Tyson and all this, but again, I didn't care. It was because all this stuff had already happened. I had already seen his heroics in Man of Steel, and Man of Steel was the time to show us these implications. And so the Batman versus Superman gets bogged down in this, and it doesn't drive the plot forward. The plot gets lost in all of these faux intellectual conversations, and when the movie could have been so much better just focusing on a clash of ideals, and instead we get lost in we thought we were the only ones out there, but now we found out we're not. And it's but again, that is precisely grounding this in, holding up a reflection to us in the mirror. Now, you say it should have been done in Man of Steel. Well, Man of Steel is basically setting up he is now among us. So of course the aftermath of that would be a more like taking this harder look, and now the world is dealing with the aftermath of things that happened before, especially with the controversy of what happens in the desert. And again, this is an example of the Ultimate Edition clears up all the plot holes in this case. Now, I would venture to say, and I do lay, and you mentioned your blog. You work for Daily Wire. I work for Western Free Press, and in my Greatest Conservative Film series, I've done like several articles on Zack Snyder's films. I've done one on Man of Steel. I've done one on BVS, and most recently, I've done one on Watchmen. And I've laid out this whole thing about this. And really, what this is, again, you could say, well, we thought we were alone in the universe. Well, again, this is grounding this in, forcing us to make this connection in our world. Now, he does it in a far different way. That's my point. He tries to force the audience into this, and you just said it was forcing. That's my point. He was trying to force the audience into this, and a movie should not try to force the audience.
I think we have a different definition. I think we have a different definition of that in that case, where it's like we are emotionally connected because we are drawn into this emotional connection. Now, you may not have been, but I certainly was, and the fact that it felt we had these real world figures, it did make me automatically emotionally link this to, what if this were in our world? How would our world react? And I think that is the value of it. That is precisely the value of this take. That yes, you can refer to it like Marvel kind of does, but I feel like this is still just a matter of taste. Again,
But in the interest of moving things along a little bit, Jacob, I'm curious, what's your opinion of Warner Brothers' motivations for bringing in Whedon to kind of, depending on how you want to look at it, finish or retool Justice League?
Money. That's what it was, bottom line. I actually think Joss Whedon is a better director than Zack Snyder. Certainly the first Avengers is better than anything Zack Snyder has ever put together in his life. So I think, but again, Whedon had Snyder stuff to work with. And that's what I keep reminding people. It's like everyone thinks that Whedon came in and just shot the movie. That's not what happened. No, he got shoved all this... well, I know, but people talk about it in that sense. But he got shoved Snyder stuff, and he had to edit it together to make a cohesive movement. But as far as Warner Brothers' motivation, it was just money. They were trying to save a film that they had spent millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on, and that's all there was to it. And did Whedon do a poor job of saving Justice League? Yes, I think he probably made it. I actually was kind of like when Justice League came out, I saw it in theaters. I actually thought it was kind of meh. I didn't really care. I didn't really think it was, as bad as some of the other stuff, but I didn't think it was really good. It was just kind of like an average film, you could take your buddies to when they're drunk or whatever. So, if you want me to say I thought Justice League was good, no, I didn't think it was good. I just thought it was average. But as far as the motivations go, it was just about money. They were just trying to save it, and they used I do actually kind of feel bad for Snyder about this. They used a tragic event in his family to take advantage of him, and I think that was very slimy of them. Whatever my opinion of his movies are,
that was a completely dick move.
Yeah, 1,000%. I agree with that. That was a slimy move by Warner Brothers, and that's why it's kind of softened about the release of Snyder Cut. I kind of had to take back a step and go, wait a minute, the Snyder Cut. The reason we don't see it is because Warner Brothers took advantage of Zack Snyder, and like I said, that is incredibly slimy of them. So, for whatever their motivations, they're trying to rescue the movie. They're trying to finish it in their minds. Rescue. That's what I'm not saying. I'm thinking that in their minds, rescue the film, like what they did with Suicide Squad. That's they turned that into a toy commercial, right? Yeah, and so that's kind of my take on their motivations. I think they were just being slimy. I think we all agree on that, at least.
Yeah. Why do you think that they thought they would? I guess the obvious answer is, why do you think they'd get more money if they brought Whedon? Is because they thought they had a stinker on their hands. Yeah. But I'm kind of curious as to why they thought they had a stinker on their hands exactly.
I'll tell you why.
The Zack Snyder film.
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you exactly what happened. What it was they thought in their heads that the reason that the MCU was succeeding and the DCU was failing was because there was more humor, there was more comedy, and so on. Now, that's why they told David Ayer to reshoot Suicide Squad and make it more comical, make it more fun, and so on. They wanted to be more lighthearted, and when Wonder Woman did very well, they thought, oh, well, it's more lighthearted, therefore it isn't. Now, never mind that when the Ultimate Edition was released, a lot of those critics who had trashed Batman v Superman the theatrical cut who then looked at the Ultimate Edition, then turned around and said, this is actually a very good film. I apologize, Zack Snyder. Now, of course, Warner Brothers learned the wrong lessons. They thought, oh, well, the problem is the tone. The problem is it's too dark, so they bring in Joss Whedon to make it more fun. Now, I will say this. I do deeply enjoy the first Avengers a lot. But here's the thing. I can't help thinking that that's the last good thing that Joss Whedon has done and will do for a while. And I'll tell you why. I think there was a time when Joss Whedon was very good. There was a time when Joss Whedon was very entertaining. But the thing is, the problem is, and this is almost tragic, I really kind of feel sorry for him on this. The thing that everyone kept praising him for was his wit, the wit of his dialogue. And as time went on, he started buying into that more and more, and he started caring about his other things less and less. And as time goes on, after the Avengers, when he's feeling all this pressure and all this stress, for example, of the MCU, like Kevin Feige demanding he put all this stuff in Age of Ultron, he started caring about things less and less, and therefore he became, and you also kind of see this in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's more or less he's become a jokester, where he does his quippy dialogue, his quippy stuff, where the characters are kind of doing a quip a minute, and that's pretty much it. No real substance behind it. And therefore, he's kind of sort of in stopping caring and just doing what everyone expects him to do, which is more jokes, more jokes, more jokes. It's ironic because as far as I being able to see, the person who is becoming the hack is Whedon, not Snyder. Because say what you will about Snyder, but he has a clear set vision and he strives to do it, as opposed to just doing what people are demanding him to do. as opposed to being brought in and say, okay, just give it more dialogue and jokes. And what jokes does he do? He has Flash fall on Wonder Woman's boobs, which he completely recycled from his own film Age of Ultron. Or again, like the whole Russian family thing, which is something that he salvaged, that he gleaned from. He wanted to, but Kevin Feige, to his credit, said no, that's not necessary. So he does the whole Russian family thing. Now, I understand the Russian family thing, like showing the victims so that, will they save them in time? But he kept cutting back to them, and in the process, cut out some very wonderful things that Zack did, such as the confirming of the engagement when Clark says, "I'll take that as a yes." What? The ring. So here's the thing: I don't put all the blame on Joss Whedon. Not all. Most of it I don't, because he was brought in. He was given a strict deadline. They put a gun to his head. Reshoot all this. Cut it down to 2 hours. Reshoot wherever you need to do to make it flow is 2 hours. Oh, and by the way, we are not changing the release date. Go. And no one can work under those conditions. So I can't really fault him for that. I mean, I do fault him for putting in this nonsense like thirsty, or the falling on Wonder Woman's chest, or way too much cutting back to the Russian family, or the whole hope is like car keys. And I like that, and I like the idea of that scene, that first scene where he's talking to the kids, but it felt like it was setting up something that had no payoff. Like, what's their favorite thing about Earth? And he looks away and he looks like he's about to answer, then it cuts. And I was so sure there was going to be some kind of payoff at the end where we cut back to that, where he gives the kids the answer. But we didn't do that. So it felt like he was just putting that in for the sake of putting it in. He was putting in clutter, which was unnecessary. So again, So again, like, if you want to talk about Snyder, well, the things that Jacob has said about Snyder, you could just as easily talk about what Joss Whedon did. But again, the blame is not first and foremost on him. It's on Kevin Tsujihara, Toby Emmerich, maybe Jeff Johns. Yeah, people are back and forth on that. But as far as he's concerned, like, what he added was pretty much on him, and it is just him doing what everyone is expecting Joss Whedon to throw in jokes, throw in more screwball humor.
I agree. I very much agree with that take on Whedon, and as far as whether or not he doesn't really deserve a lot of blame for how Justice League turned out. That was pretty much the studio saying, "Hey, do this impossible task. Go for it. Yeah, it'll be fun. Go ahead and hold up the world for a little while there, Atlas."
And let's not forget, they originally hired Joss Whedon to do Batgirl, which would have been a phenomenal film.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I would agree, except what he did, like, he was totally like I hate using the whole like feminazi talking points of objectification and male gaze, but the whole thing is just so ironic about how much Joss Whedon is praised as being this great male feminist, and Zack is like derided as being misogynist, and yet lo and behold, just look at how Zack handles Amy Adams as Lois Lane, or Diana, or like Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and compare that to Flash falling on Wonder Woman's breasts, or saying that Lois was the thirstiest woman, and all that, like basically stripping away this beautiful subplot of Lois, like, recovering in her emotional recovery from Clark's death, and stripping that away and replacing it with thirsty and all that. And of course, don't get me started on the butt shots of Wonder Woman. So it really, and honestly, look, if we were talking about Joss Whedon in his golden age, where like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel or Firefly, then absolutely I would have been super excited for Batgirl. But I feel like over the year he's kind of sort of lost his edge, and he's sort of lost his true treating these characters like actual human beings, instead just making them jokers.
I would agree with that. I think he lost his edge.
I think Avengers 2, I think that process kind of broke him in a way. It was tough.
They said that he had a lot of egos to work with in that set, because they've already made a movie that broke worldwide box office records, and now they're coming back off that high, and they've done a bunch of them have done sequels, and
Yep.
they're like, okay, Mr. Whedon, this is how we want to do this film. And
Yeah.
so
And
he's no Alfred Hitchcock. You know,
No.
Alfred Hitchcock had a way of
No.
controlling his actors,
Right.
but Whedon.
Actors should be treated as though they were cattle.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and so, but I will say this, like, and you brought that up about all that pressure that Joss Whedon had, and that's why I don't fully fault him, but I do think he did break. But it really just goes to show how the MCU, as enjoyable as the MCU has been, surely you must have noticed that the MCU has sort of become just maybe a bit too formulaic. I mean, lately with Endgame and all, they start to break away from that, but it started to be more fun and games. But I feel like they brought in Joss Whedon. Now, just compare the quality of the original Avengers versus Age of Ultron, and it's like they gave Joss the control he needed to do Avengers, and then with Age of Ultron, they're like whipping him into shape, says, "Get in line and do exactly what I'm telling you to do from on high." And again, that's also what happened with the Russo brothers. Like, Winter Soldier, as I said, is a masterpiece. I love Winter Soldier so much. And Civil War, I feel like, again, it's worth noting, and this is all known, that Marcus and McFeely and the Russo brothers, they were all set to do Captain America Serpent Society and have Zola as the arch-villain, to show up again as the arch-villain as an AI. But what happened? Warner Brothers announced they were doing Batman v Superman, and Kevin Feige runs into their office and says, "Guys, scrap what you're doing. We're doing Civil War." And that really goes to what happened. Now,
That's not totally true. They were planning on doing Civil War as a sequel to Age of Ultron, and they just decided to merge the film.
Avengers.
Yeah, as an Avengers. But they merged those films, I don't think that's fair.
Well, to rush it. At the very least, he wanted to rush it because in order to compete
with Batman. Sure, he wanted to move it up.
So
don't forget the fan reaction to that announcement was positive.
Yeah, because Civil War was one of the legendary events. But the problem is, the central problem with Captain America Civil War is that it's Captain America Civil War and not Avengers Civil War.
So what?
Because, well, here's the problem is. The problem is you've made the film, is it centering on Cap, even though Civil War, part of the publicity of Civil War was choose your side. Now, if you're making it a Captain America movie, then that means the film is already taken a side. The film is already sided with Cap, essentially, by naming it Captain America Civil War.
I don't agree with that. I think that goes. I don't agree with that. I think that it's just they just were using Captain America. They were like, "What's the next on the slate? Let's merge it with America Civil War so we can move it up." But I don't think, I mean, if you watch like the trailers and even the short 30-second trailers, I feel like it was very much choose your side. It doesn't matter what the title of the film is.
But the irony is, it's funny you brought up the trailers. It's funny you brought up the trailers. I love the first trailer in particular for Civil War, really got me right here. But the problem is that trailer really hyped up the fact that this was a tragic clash among friends where the Avengers is tearing itself apart. And I felt, now there wasn't any Baron Zemo, which the movie took one up. They took essentially the bane of Captain America and made him some weasel.
No,
guy.
They didn't. No, that's not true. They didn't use Helmut. They didn't use Baron Zemo's character. They used Helmut Zemo, who is it was the son, I believe, of the original Zemo. So that's not really fair to say. And also, I don't think he was a weasel. He masterminded this whole plan to divide the Avengers. I mean, it's not like.
Gentlemen,
his motivation, going back to Batman versus Superman,
gentlemen,
his motivation was way better than Lex Luthor's. Lex Luthor had no motivation.
Are you serious?
As a villain, he is the worst villain, or the worst interpretation of Lex Luthor I've ever seen.
Well, he spells it out.
Hold on.
He does not spell it out. My dad was mean to me, so I hate Superman.
Yeah. Worst interpretation I can kind of give you. But I can't concede the motivation aspect. But now that we jumped back into the DCEU, we're coming up kind of on the hour here. So I've got kind of one last question for you guys to answer. And I'm going to give Eric. I'm going to give you the floor first on this one. Let's assume They released a Snyder cut,
Yeah.
and just for sake of the question, let's assume it's good.
Okay.
What does DCEU does the new leadership course correct and actually swing back more in the direction of Snyder's vision, even though, let's face it, they're not bringing him back. I don't think there's any world in which that happens.
It's very interesting you brought that up because because the theatrical cut of Justice League, which has come to be called Justice League, it really doesn't set up. It really doesn't set up anything that Warner Brothers hasn't jettisoned anyway. I mean, the only thing it really sets up is the Legion of Doom, which there's no evidence that they're going to pick up on that. So if they were to release the Snyder Cut, it wouldn't really matter which version is accepted as canon because the films are not picking up on anything that Justice League set up. So it's really almost kind of a moot point that whichever version is considered canon, it won't really change the films that they're setting up. Now, as far as like whether it's good or not, I mean, whether I think there's no doubt in my mind that it'll be good for Jacob.
Actually, though, would it change? Would it change the films that they're setting up? That's the question I'm interested in. Will they start dropping in little hints about a Legion of Doom? Do we actually start to get hints that Steppenwolf was just a messenger boy? The big boy's still out there.
Well, even then,
which for the record, everybody watching, going straight to Darkseid was a freaking dumb move anyway. I'm sorry, that was stupid. You don't make your first movie about your single biggest bad.
No.
You don't do that because you can't top it. Right now, a lot of people are talking about how the MCU is like, okay, so where do they go after Thanos? What? How do you freaking top that? We destroyed and then saved half the freaking universe. And what do we do then? And that took 10 years to develop.
And yet, the very first Avengers movie set up Thanos.
Set it up.
Yes.
But didn't intend to go there immediately, and that was the original intention that was the original intention with Justice League. We were going to see Darkseid, and I don't think that. I always thought that was a bad call, that you're going straight to the top. Bad move.
Well, that depends on whether or not you just want to do big villain and then bigger villain and then bigger villain. Because, like, for example, I would say, like, look at, for example, the James Bond movies. They were doing, like, these larger-than-life, increasingly larger-than-life spectacular stuff, especially with the Roger Moore era, all the way up to Moonraker, where they were kind of jumping the shark. And then in the very next film, For Your Eyes Only, they go back to more grounded. So you can do that. I would say you could do that easily, and it works really well. Now, as far as where do you go for, like, what's it setting up? Well, even in the Joss Whedon Justice League, like, he sets up for the unity for Darkseid. But even for what we know about the Snyder Cut, even then, you could kind of delay it as much as you want, put it off Darkseid as much as you want, because all they're doing is setting up that there's a bigger force out there behind Steppenwolf. Now, you could set up how much you want. You could do some filler. Heck, bring in the Legion of Doom. I don't have a problem with that for Justice League 2. But then, Justice League 3 or whoever, you bring in Darkseid and do the Final Crisis kind of thing. And I mean, it's worth noting, you mentioned, Jake, that you say that maybe Warner Brothers shouldn't necessarily think about doing a direct parallel to the MCU where it's this big, super expanded, all-connected universe. Yeah, of course not. As you may or may not be aware, Zack Snyder had a clear-cut 5-part arc that he laid out with the help of Jim Lee, who is like one of the heads of DC Comics, and of course is now the co-head.
He's not doing a very good job. I'm very disappointed in how Jim Lee is handling DC Comics.
actually, that's not. That isn't being put on him. Dan Didio is more or less putting him out there as a figurehead, but Dan Didio is doing all that. That's all on Dan Didio. It's not on Jim. But Jim is more being focused on being like helping out with the films and all that. And the films so far, I've actually been impressed with. And some
Shazam was good. Aquaman was good. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And but again, he laid out a specific 5-part plan. He did like Man of Steel, BVS, Justice League 1, Justice League 2, and Part 5, which may or may not have been Flashpoint. And that would have been essentially, from what I've been piecing together, that would have been his Days of the Future Past, where you do a transition to a new DCU where these filmmakers can do whatever they want. They want to be more Marvel, make it more Marvel, whatever. You can do like a younger Batman if you want to do a younger Batman. So he was essentially doing a more closed-knit universe. And there were other films around it, like, as I was explaining before the show, like this shirt that he did for Design for Charity is essentially his layout for what he wanted to do with the DCU. And there was going to be films like an Aquaman film, a Wonder Woman film, and all that other filmmakers would do around his 5-part plan. But he would do his plan. It would have a clear-cut beginning, middle, and end, and then a Flashpoint, which has a parallel to Days of Future Past, where when everything is all said and done and Barry's cleared up everything, he comes back and there's changes to it where you can now you're now given free reign to do whatever you want. So essentially, it's sort of the best of both worlds, if you will. As far as I'm concerned, like as of right now, if Warner Brothers had stuck to the plan, we would have gotten Justice League Final Crisis a few months ago. And then we would have gotten, like, say, Part 5 or whatever would have been, like, next year or maybe a little bit. And then, boom, it could be exactly whatever you want it to be, whether it's a whole bunch of standalones or another universe, whatever you want to be. So I personally would have liked to look forward to, because I love the whole, like, as someone who is more analytical when it comes to, like, complex kind of storylines, like Andrew Klavan, of course, is one of my heroes. Supreme Overlord Klavan, King of the Multiverse, and all that good stuff.
I debated Klavan about comic book films.
Yes, actually. I saw that.
Was that on yours?
No, he had me on his show.
And I will, say
which episode was it? Because I'm sure
I remember. Go to my blog. Go to media appearances. It's linked in that section.
Okay,
he let me clip it on Studio J.
And I'll say this: like, I would have given him much different answers, but the answers are based on the fact that I like Zack Snyder, you don't. Because, like, when he says, for example, that he doesn't feel that superhero films truly capture the sexual tensions of the genders, I would have pointed to Henry Cavill and Amy Adams, especially like in Man of Steel, BVS, because, like, you want true sexual tension of, like, classical masculinity and femininity brought to its logical whole. You look no further than how Henry Cavill and Amy Adams play Clark and Lois. Like, the very first time Clark saves Lois in that scout ship, it's a symbolic sex scene, essentially. It's symbolic. It's a beautifully romantic, passionate scene, like a great parallel, and it really sets up a glorious sense of he has a firm grasp of, and he does exactly what Andrew Klavan says is missing in superhero films, which I think he might get a kick out of that if he hasn't watched his films already.
Okay, so just to sum that up, bottom line, even if Snyder Cut is good, you probably don't see it affecting where they're going a whole lot.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Jacob, your basic opinion on that. Assuming it's good, assuming it gets a positive fan reaction, does the Warner Brothers leadership look at this thing and go, maybe we ought to give Zach a call and at least get him to executive produce?
No, I think it's going to be, I think if they do release it, which I think we're going to hear, if it doesn't come out this Christmas, we're going to hear about it next Christmas. I think they're saving it for a holiday release.
Right.
But I don't think it's going to have any impact. I agree. I don't think it's going to have any impact on the film, other than maybe if some of them gets a hold of, like, Cyborg or the Flash finally, it might affect the tone of the movies. But I don't think it'll be like this huge lasting impact. I don't think they're going to do the Superman Returns thing. No one wants to do the Superman Returns thing. Yeah, I know. But that's what Bryan Singer did, right? He saw the Richard Donner cut and he goes, "That's the movie I'm going to make a sequel to." But then no one got it. Because no one had really seen the Donner cut at that point. Just a bunch of fanboys. And so I think you got this movie that was incredibly confusing and poorly acted. But it's.
I'll agree with that. You and I are simpatico on Superman Returns. We can agree. Yeah.
Right, so I don't think so. I think that maybe the Warner Brothers has learned from that mistake, and so I think that they're going. If we see the Snyder Cut released, it'll just affect some of the movies tonal wise, but nothing more than that. I mean, we might, like you said, we might see them move forward like with like a subplot, like with Legion of Doom, like what Eric said. But I don't think
Which was
we
weak,
might.
by the way.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, oh, yeah. Well, I know, but what I mean is
Yeah,
that might
yeah.
influence that film and to be a
Okay.
little bit
Yeah.
more darker
I-
or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I sincerely doubt that they will, because like they've more or less shelved any idea of Justice League so far, and I really doubt they're going to do a Legion of Doom regardless, even though I personally would have liked it. Although apparently from what I've heard, like everything in that last scene was Snyder, except for that very last half of a line by Luthor when he says, "Should we have a league of our own?" Because supposedly he was going to say, to put it plainly, "I need you to kill the Batman." It was going to set up the Batman, Batfleck script. Which, by the way, Jay Oliver, again, he directed The Dark Knight Returns, the animated Dark Knight Returns.
Mhm.
And he looked
That's a
at
good
that
film.
script,
That's
and
amazing.
and Jay Oliver said he looked at Batfleck's script, and he said, "This is the best Batman script I have ever read."
Oh, brother, he was wrong. Ben Affleck isn't.
How do you know? How do you know? You've never seen it.
Because Ben Affleck wrote it. Ben Affleck, for come on, but Ben Affleck didn't have any respect for Batman while he was portraying him in either Batman v Superman or Justice League. It was
okay,
it was going to be terrible.
I have
That's,
I have to defend Batfleck on that
Yes.
particular point, Jacob. For the only reason I have to defend him specifically is because the reason he played and this is public record, the reason he played Daredevil back in the day was because he thought it was the closest he would ever get to playing Batman. He actually is a
And they should have that
was
should have
such
been
a bad-
deterrence. And this is another point about Snyder being a hack. He knew that people. He went and said, "Okay, I'm looking at Ben Affleck to be Batman." The fans had a visceral reaction to that because we remember Daredevil, and real Batman fans had a bad reaction to this. And
You know who else?
And it was
You know who else
bad
they had a visceral
mojo.
reaction?
Should have listened, and we were right.
Well, do you know who else they had that true Batman fans had a bad visceral reaction to? Michael Keaton.
Okay, well, sure, but that was the '80s. I'm talking about now.
Uh-oh.
You know, it's like it was okay. Sometimes it's good to gamble, but don't forget, Mel Gibson was originally cast in that film, but he backed out because he didn't like the costume or whatever, and so he had to go with someone else. So he went with Michael Keaton, and so he took a gamble and it paid off fine.
Of course,
I actually
it's
think
worth
that.
noting.
But
Well, it's
Zack
funny you
Snyder
should mention
did a
that.
gamble and he was wrong. He came up snake eyes.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that was Tim Burton's second choice. Batfleck was actually Zack Snyder's second choice. His first choice was Josh Brolin.
That would have been bad too.
Would it?
I don't know.
Yes, he's too old to play Batman. So was Ben Affleck.
Considering the
Dark Knight
Batman that they were,
Dark Knight Returns.
I mean, they were wanting an older Batman, so I'm totally okay with that.
the whole point was-
but
Then they should have gotten Kevin Conroy.
just have anybody in the suit and have Kevin Conroy voice him.
Yeah, I would be down with that. He's the computer voice since that's a thing now. Like that,
Right.
he's just that.
You know, in all honesty, Kevin Conroy is the best Batman.
I can agree with that animated. Like he's got that voice. He's like whenever you pick up a comic and read it, I defy you. Like I have to almost make an effort to read a Batman comic in Christian Bale's voice. I can, but by instinct, my mind goes to Kevin Conroy.
Well, I will say I read the first issue of Batman Universe by Bendis, and I actually heard Troy Baker. I didn't hear Kevin Conroy. That was the first time that had happened. I had never heard Troy Baker's voice in a comic book ever. But for some reason, when I was reading Bendis, I was hearing Troy Baker's Batman.
Troy Baker. I only think of Troy Baker as the replacement Mark Hamill for Joker. That's how I know.
He voiced Batman in Batman.
Yeah, I know he did.
Teenage
Yeah, I know he
Mutant
did.
Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, I know he did, but it's just that's what he's become known as the replacement Mark Hamill. But regardless,
sure. Yeah.
But regardless, like but regardless, Ginger, like you mentioned Zach being like possibly being brought on as producers to kind of like merge it on. He still is producer. He's more like executive producer, but he is producing, for example, Wonder Woman still.
I think that's more about his relationship with Jenkins, though.
Yeah. I was gonna say, and that's a credit that I always question. Yeah. Like,
and
what does being an executive producer really mean?
It means he's a money. It basically means he's a money man. But I will say this: with J.J. Abrams coming in to Warner Brothers and be giving the keys to the kingdom, I personally, as a Star Trek fan, I will be forever grateful to him for making it cool to be a Star Trek fan again. Because now I can go out in public and say I'm a Star Trek fan without people just going, yeah, and so on.
Well, my problem with hopefully J.J. Abrams won't be around too long because he's been again like he's an okay director. He's very hit and miss for me, but he's kind of a copy. You know, he's like Kakashi from Naruto. He's the copy director. So and he's the mystery box, and so I can't really see him doing a superhero movie.
I mean, have you ever looked up his script for way back for Superman Flyby?
I actually heard it wasn't that good. I mean, I've heard
what it was.
They want to adapt it for an animated film.
What it was it wasn't that nostalgic. It wasn't that Christopher Reeves-esque. In other words, it was the exact opposite of Superman Returns.
I gotcha.
But the thing is, like, if you read about like the things he was doing, a lot of it comes across like some of the experimentation that kind of reminds you a bit of Smallville, like he was having Lois and Clark meet up being college sweethearts and all that, which is kind of almost harkens to a Smallville, for example. But the thing is, I'm personally am very excited because Mission Impossible 3 and Star Trek and Star Wars like set a pattern with him that he does preserve.
You had me until Star Wars.
He makes it a point. Well, look, Last Jedi was not his fault. That was all on Ryan. That was all on Ryan Johnson.
He wanted Ryan Johnson to be his buddy.
That was Kathleen Kennedy.
Yeah, but he went along with it. Yeah, they gave him the keys of the kingdom, and he should have. Everyone knows Ryan Johnson. He's the second hack in Hollywood who's making films, and so that. When you said Star Trek, I was on board when you said Star Trek and Mission Impossible 3. Even if you had said 8mm, I would have been on board.
This is what I was bringing up. You can like those films or not, but the pattern he is setting up is this, that he makes it a point to not do hard reboots. He preserves the franchise. He preserves the pre-established cast whenever he can. He kept Tom Cruise as Ethan. He kept Vig Rhames and so on. And with Star Wars, like there was no hard reboot, like it was Episode 7. With Star Trek, he kept Leonard Nimoy to emphasize that the original timeline still exists and it's not a hard reboot. It's just this is a spin-off timeline, and Leonard Nimoy is like passing the torch.
Right.
So there is no doubt in my mind, especially we considered that when they were going to do Superman Flyby, Henry Cavill was a runner-up to play Superman. They even did a costume test with him. Now, he was close second. They ultimately met with Matt Bomer, who really is almost a doppelganger for Henry Cavill, kind of, sort of. But he actually had Amy Adams cast to play Lois. But then they pulled the plug on it for whatever reason. But the thing is, when he comes back, he's going to preserve that franchise. He's going to keep Henry Cavill and Amy Adams and all that. But it is also, knowing his box office track record, he is also going to be a good reconciliation between crowd pleasing and at the same time, he's not afraid to do what has to go against the grain. And he and Zack Snyder are friends. Like when he was filming Force Awakens and when Zack was filming Batman v Superman, they were kind of like busting each other's balls with some fan art in a very awesome kind of way, like doing fan art of Superman as a Jedi and all that cool stuff. So for me, it fills me with a lot of hope that at the very least, even if he's not going to full-fledged pick up Zack's plans for Justice League 2 or Flashpoint, he's still going to build up from the foundations that were laid out for him.
Well, if that's the case, I'm curious, how will that impact Matt Reeves' Batman, or The Batman, whatever it's called today?
Here's the thing.
Will that be a standalone film like Joker, or do you think that's going to be connected to DCEU? Because right now they're saying it's connected, but I don't know if it is.
Well, what they're saying is, it's connected, but in a way that it's set in the 90s, so it's a prequel. It's the story that Matt Reeves' Batman trilogy is the story of the 20 years. essentially. Like
Okay.
over the span.
Well, then hopefully they get a real actor to play Joker. So whoever.
Jared Leto's an Oscar winner, man.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sadly.
no. I hear no Jared Leto Joker. Oh my goodness. Hey, if anything, honestly, that right there, and
I want to see.
It's one of those situations where I can't put it all on Leto because
to be fair,
the writers and the directors.
He's barely in the movie. He's barely in the movie that we
because
got.
they cut so many of his scenes out. They cut
release
the movie
the air
was
cut.
a Joker movie, and they cut all his scenes out.
And that's why, it is almost universally accepted among the Snyder Cut movement that once we get the Snyder Cut, our next order of business is we want the air cut, and we want to see what Leto was going to give us as.
Oh, we know what he was giving us. He's not a good actor. Like Blade Runner 2049, he's like the worst thing about that film. He's a terrible actor. I don't know why he's getting rolled. Now I haven't seen the Dallas Buyers Club.
He's not a great actor. He's not a great actor, but more importantly, the screenwriters and the directors came up with a ridiculous, stupid version of the Joker.
That's not even based on anything.
Exactly.
He's not even based. Like they were trying to bill it as he's based on The Dark Knight Returns. No, The Dark Knight Returns Joker
not even a little
terrifying.
Well,
he's a terrifying. Frank Miller's Joker. He wasn't based on Tim Burton. Give me
no. I wasn't saying that, Jacob. Let me finish.
Okay.
My point was not based off of anything either. He made Joker. He gave him a name, made him a gangster, and then made him a mobster, and then made him the guy who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, which completely goes against the mythology. And it was very ballsy of him. I'll give him that. But don't tell me that was based off of anything.
Yeah, it was. It was based off Neil Adams' Batman, Joker. Like not the origin, but how the Joker was portrayed as more of like this
how he acted as the Joker.
Yeah, the more sadistic gangster that Mark Hamill again made popular. That was the Neil Adams Joker. Very Silver Age version of the Joker. So he was that's what he was based off of.
Yeah.
Not the origin.
All right, gentlemen, we have gone over, and we've not only gone over time, we've gone over the rails just a little bit here with some of our tangents and everything. But sometimes you got to let those ride because they're fun.
Yeah. It is fun. I'll say that.
So at various points I'm just sitting back listening and enjoying the rabbit trail because I'm having a good time.
Ben Shapiro was right, by the way. Except about BVS, except for one thing. The one beef that I have with Ben Shapiro's review of BVS, he's right on BVS except for this one little thing. He said, and I quote, Amy Adams did fine as Lois, but she's too old for Henry Cavill's Superman. I'm like, seriously, man, have you seen Amy Adams? She stopped aging at 27. Seriously.
Okay. Well, yeah, but Ben also said that, oh man, maybe I shouldn't say this. He is my boss, but I've told him this face to face. He said that that Ben Affleck's Batman was based off Arkham Knight. It was a combination of Arkham Knight and Frank Miller's Batman. No, it's not. No, it's not.
Listen, that warehouse scene is total Arkham Knight.
If it is, it's a parody of those two.
That warehouse scene was totally Arkham Knight.
It was.
That was totally
he drew the scene in. That's my point. But that doesn't mean that character is based off of him.
And in fact, it was also based on the fact that let's be perfectly honest, and people are whining about Batfleck allegedly killing when he really doesn't set out to kill. What happens is people die in the heat of the fight, which is absolutely what happens in the Arkham games. You cannot say otherwise. When he's fighting a whole bunch of goons,
he had a machine gun on his Batmobile and was mowing criminals down.
So did Christian Bale.
No, he did not. He didn't have a
Christian
machine
Bale.
gun.
Christian Bale was shooting at Talia al Ghul in Dark Knight Rises, and that caused Talia to crash and caused her to die.
Okay. All right. Again, off rails, although that was good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in to the debate. Feel free to do the like, the share, the commenting below, and all of that. You can find Jacob at Real Jacob Airy on the Twitters, Studio Jake on the YouTubes. His articles show up in the Daily Wire over there. You can find Eric over here at Hardboiled Films on Twitter, and I believe it was Western Free Press.
Western Free Press. Free Press. And if you want to hear more about my point of view as exactly why Zack Snyder's vision for Man of Steel and BVS is in fact consistent and very well characterized and so on, read my articles.
Go do that.
I keep trying to
you can go to my blog to find out why Batman vs. Superman is a hack film like all of other Snyder's films.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you can both go and read both and form your own opinions. Show up for round 2, which will actually start out with pistols at dawn. So thanks. Thank you. Thanks again for tuning in, and be here next time. That'll be in a couple of weeks. We are working on another guest who you may or may not be familiar with. I'm not going to name drop him just yet, except to call him the Secret Santa of Conservatarian Twitter. We'll leave it with that. And until then, keep on fighting the good fight.